What's up everybody, this is Master Ian Gamer, and today I'm going to take a look at the mysterious character named Liao, and determine not only how and why he's likely to be an upcoming playable hero, but also examine the major role he may have been playing in both the past and present Overwatch timelines. I will note that large amounts of this will be speculation, however I'm going to try and base it on as much hard evidence as possible in order to form some realistic theories. So with that, let's dive on in. Real quick though, if this is your first time on my channel, then don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Anyways, now let's get to theorizing. So before I get into the possible story presence of Liao, I want to clarify what we actually already know about him, and also dispel some of the common misconceptions I've seen floating around the Overwatch community. First of all, despite the fact that I refer to Liao as a he, we don't actually know anything about their gender. For all we know, Liao could even be an omnic. However, in this video, I'm just going to assume it's a he for the sake of grammatical simplicity. The next thing to note is that despite the many images people have used to visualize Liao, we actually have no idea what he looks like. The only image that Blizzard has made any kind of official comment on is this one, and lead Overwatch writer Michael Chu himself said that this was not Liao. In fact, the only official mention of Liao came as part of the Overwatch blog post back on May 27th, 2016. It lists the 6 founding members of Overwatch, 5 of which we already have currently in-game, and the other one being Liao. Other than the aforementioned comment from Chu, this is the only time we've ever even seen or heard the name Liao. However, in order to help represent my theories and speculation in this video, I will be using this image from the Recall cinematic to represent him. There's no particular reason, I just think it works well for this purpose. So, now that I've covered the literal entirety of what we know about the character, let's get into speculating. With regards to his name, Liao is a common Chinese surname, meaning that, more than likely, this will be his nation of origin. This is even further supported when we look at the other founding members of Overwatch. Their home nations span across North America, Europe, and Africa. So, given that Overwatch was formed as a global organization, it would make sense for the 6th founding member to hail from Asia, which otherwise lacks representation. Furthermore, there's a strong possibility that Liao was, or still is, some kind of scientist. Looking back at the blog post which first introduced his name, it refers to the 6 founding members as being soldiers and strategists who showed remarkable ingenuity. The UN brought these unique minds together, and they took down the Omnics by targeting their command and control protocols. Now, looking at the 5 known members, 4 of them are soldiers and 1's an engineer. However, given the team's description when it comes to their method of combating the Omnics, it would make sense for the team to also have a scientist on board. Someone who might better understand the programming behind these AI machines and how to fight it. And given the known roles of the other 5 members, it seems likely that the scientist on the team would be Liao. Continuing with the Liao scientist idea, there's also a good chance that Liao either was or still is associated with Liucheng Interstellar, the space exploration company which operates out of Lijiang Tower. We can make this connection on the grounds that both are Chinese, but more so is the fact that Lijiang Tower doesn't appear to currently have any playable heroes directly tied to it. The majority of Overwatch maps are in some way connected to the game's story and characters. There are some exceptions, such as Ilios, although I've got a whole different theory regarding that, which I'll have to talk about some other time. But for the most part, every map has at least one hero. Some of these connections didn't even exist until either the map or hero was released much later than the other, such as Dorado with Sombra, or Numbani with Orisa and Doomfist. So, looking back at Lijiang Tower, the only current heroes we could really connect it to would be Mei and Winston. While Mei is a Chinese scientist, her area of expertise is climatology, so I doubt she would have had much association with the outer space focused Liucheng Interstellar. Winston's connection would be his origins on the Horizon lunar colony, which was a product of their Lunar Ops program. But while it's possible that Winston visited Lijiang Tower at some point after arriving on Earth, we know that he ultimately ended up being a member of Overwatch, and therefore likely didn't have much to do with Liucheng after being one of their test subjects. and thus Lijiang Tower remains a map without a hero. But if it were to get a hero, it would make sense for them to be some kind of Chinese scientist. and as I talked about in my last video regarding the relatively recent addition of the wheelchair on Control Center, this could be Blizzard's way of drawing intrigue towards the map to prep for their arrival. Also, speaking of my last video, this is where I think we could start to see the role Liao has been playing in the Overwatch story. I brought up the possibility of an animated short being released alongside Liao as a playable hero, and said that the short might cover the events of Winston immediately after he escapes Horizon and ends up on Earth. Being a genetically altered space gorilla, he would certainly have had a hard time fitting in on Earth, and thus, by some means or another, likely ended up back in the arms of Liu Interstellar, either as a fugitive or a refugee. So then, how exactly would Winston get from here to being a member of Overwatch? And that is where I think Liao comes in. While details regarding when exactly Winston arrived on Earth are scarce, it almost definitely was after the Omnic Crisis had already ended. Thus, Overwatch would have already been well established by this point, and assuming that Liao was a part of Liu Kang prior to forming Overwatch, it would make sense for him to have connections to both. During this time, he may have had one foot in Overwatch and the other still in Liu Kang as some kind of dual employment. Given that Overwatch had some level of spacefaring endeavors, as seen through the satellite launch station at Watchpoint Gibraltar, it would make sense that Overwatch and Liu Kang might have had some kind of partnership with each other. We can even see the Lunar Ops logo on Winston's spacesuit in the Gibraltar facility, although it's also possible that this suit was just a keepsake from his time on Horizon. On the other hand, perhaps after the end of the Omnic Crisis, Liao actually left Overwatch altogether to work solely for Liu Kang Interstellar. This could explain his absence from the Overwatch timeline following the crisis, and might explain why other characters never reference him. He may have only played a major role in the organization for a short time at the beginning before Overwatch became a global peacekeeper. Regardless, as long as he was in fact associated with Liu Kang at the time of Winston's arrival on Earth, it would make sense that he would have been aware of the gorilla escapee and played some part in dealing with him. Given that Liao is presumably a very bright individual, he likely recognized the same intelligence in Gorilla Winston that Harold had seen back on Horizon. In fact, given that they both worked for Liu Kang, Liao and Harold likely knew each other, and quite possibly could have even been close friends or associates. If this is the case, then Harold's death likely would have devastated Liao, and maybe Winston's presence and the shared fondness they both had for Harold could have brought the two characters closer together. Anyways, given Liao's ties to both Liu Kang Interstellar and Overwatch, he was most likely the bridge that took Winston from being an escaped test subject to a successful scientist. As I said before, Liao quite possibly would have recognized Winston's remarkable intelligence and thus saw the possibilities for him with an organization like Overwatch. Given everything he had gone through at this point, it might have been a bit awkward for Winston to become a scientist at Liu Kang. But given Overwatch's inherent image of upholding peace and unity, even a space ape would likely find a home there. And thus, Liao sent Winston on his way, while himself staying at Liu Kang Interstellar, eventually growing old just like the other founding members, and maybe even at one point becoming so physically weak that he then required a wheelchair to get around and continue working. But the animated short wouldn't end there. After chronicling his past with flashbacks of him with Overwatch and young Winston, it would fast forward up to the modern day. As an old man, now bound to a wheelchair, he's stuck living out his days doing boring office work while the world around him moves towards a new conflict. News of Talon and the return of Doomfist is causing unrest amongst his younger co-workers, and he fondly remembers a time where him and 5 others stepped up to combat such threats. And then he gets it, a call to action from an old friend that he hasn't seen in a very long time. Weighing his options, he finally decides that he still has something left to give, and is now adamant to once again make a difference. And thus, Liao enters the fight. Now, I will admit, the odds of me having nailed exactly how the story's gonna play out is pretty slim, but I certainly think it's plausible, and overall would be a really great bit of story to cover in an animated short. Also, as for what kind of in-game abilities a wheelchair-bound elderly dude might possess, well, I'm not really sure. And Blizzard might not be sure yet either. As I mentioned in my last video, Liao is most likely one of their heroes who's been sitting on the back burner for a while. They've got his character and personality all planned out, and now they're just waiting for the game to need someone new with abilities that would match him. If this is the case, then depending on what they have in mind, Liao could be added next, or not for a long time still. The addition of the wheelchair could be hinting that it'll be sometime soon, but at the same time, if Blizzard does in fact already know his story before his abilities, then maybe that isn't the case. Anyways, as much fun as it is to theorize a character's backstory and their impact on the universe as a whole, trying to predict events of an animated short will never be as reliable as looking at the hard facts. And while I already mentioned the few that pertain directly to Liao, I just want to wrap up this theory video by mentioning some other things which could support my speculation. First is that Jeff and the Blizzard team has expressed their interest in fleshing out factions other than just Overwatch and Talon. Let's look specifically at a quote from the Junkertown preview video.
We get so much opportunity to focus the story on Overwatch and Talon, but we don't get a lot of opportunity to explore some of these other groups. And I hope that Junkertown is the tip of the iceberg for what's more to come.
Now, while in this context Jeff is talking specifically about the Junkers, he does start off by saying that they want to focus more on other groups. If Blizzard wants to focus on the Junkers, then it would make sense for them to also want to explore a company such as Luchang Interstellar. And while there's already a map relevant to the company, maybe adding a new hero who represents them would be a way to even further explore their presence and role in the Overwatch universe. Moving on to another bit of evidence is the fact that we know almost nothing about Liao. In my backstory speculation, I wrote off the uncanny absence of his name and face as being the result of him leaving Overwatch very early on. And while this could be a great explanation for the in-game story, there's an even better answer when considering Blizzard's perspective. Ever since the beginning, they knew he'd become a playable hero, and not wanting to spoil his appearance or story beforehand, they've remained incredibly tight-lipped about him. Not only does this give them time to fully flesh him out internally without being restricted by anything they might have already revealed, but also it can lead to a greater, more amazing introduction when the time comes. This long-term plan might even explain other mysteries, such as the license plate on Junkertown or the clapper boards on Hollywood, although admittedly, this is likely a bit of a stretch. But either this is the case, or alternatively, they've scrapped the idea of there being a sixth founding member entirely. Much like how they canceled the Overwatch First Strike comic over a year ago now, on the grounds that they wanted to take the story in a different direction, Liao as a character may have been scrapped too. I really hope this isn't the case, but it is a possibility, and only time will tell. So there you go. These have been my very optimistic and specific theories and speculation regarding Liao as being an upcoming hero. He might not be next, but I certainly think there's enough good evidence and great potential for us to expect him at some point sooner or later. Thank you all so much for watching, and please let me know your own thoughts about Liao in the comments down below. Don't forget to vote in today's poll card, and be sure to leave a like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, and turn on notifications to both help out my channel and keep up with all my future Overwatch content. This is Master Ian Gamer signing off, and until next time, have a great day.